Dr. David Leitner, thank you for being here today. I have I did, as you mentioned, stalked you for a little bit, quite some time. I have many questions to ask you and a lot of things really to dive into and talk about, just off the top of my list, the top of my head, areas, anytime you're speaking about leadership, I think it's something that's very difficult to talk about, although it has many, 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 many books, movies, examples to talk about when it comes to leadership. But I think you preach it, you talk about it from what I've seen in a unique way. So I'm going to try to unpackage that with you.
Okay.
But I'll start with, you walked in here with a book. It seems like you're studying that book pretty heavily for just a casual read, which a book that you carry around with you. My books are not filled with stickers and notes, unfortunately. So what are you reading right now?
Right now I'm actually reading a book by the Horowitzes on leadership. It's part of what I research and what I teach. If you came to my library, you would see that most of my books, any of my research books, have thousands of little tabs in them. It's very important to me to not just read a book. I think that when you're reading any book that's got meaning to you, it gives you a sense more of what that worth is when you can go back to that book and sort of open it to something and go, oh, wow, this was an important point for me to remember, or this was something that can help me further on in my future. And all of my research books, anytime I've opened up a book when it's something that has to do with leadership, followership, strategy, tactics, the book isn't just about one time reading that information. For me, it becomes a resource that I'm going to go back to 10, 20, 100 times. And the best way to do that is to perceive it as a friend. And so those tabs are sort of when you have a good friend and you've got those great memories of here's this and here's that. So those are sort of those great memories of hey, this was an important thing. Come back and visit me sometime. And
how do you choose your books?
So I would say there's three major topics that we can talk about. It's how do I choose my research books? My research books are based on two things. One is obviously the topic, the general topic that it's in, but then it's the kind of depth that person brings to the topic. There are some books, when you read the reviews on them, it's very, very shallow, sort of here's a review of all the information. I've moved beyond that in my life. I'm at the point where I would rather deep dive into a topic and try and see how someone's bringing their own nuance to it. So when it comes to my research topics, it's more that. But then, when you get down to everyday books, I'm a science fiction, fantasy. I love Terry Pratchett. I love sarcasm. And so that's more my field of if I have to get away from my research, this is where I'm going to go.
And do you have time to read and get away from your research?
I try to. It's really important. I think that one of the things that I preach a lot of is work-life boundaries. Not balance. I somewhat detest the idea of work-life balance because you shouldn't have to balance your life with anything, but you need clear boundaries between them. And so having a fundamental sense of here are my work-life boundaries, there's how much time I'm going to put on my work and here's how much time I'm going to put on in my life towards things beyond my work is really, really important. And one of the things that I enjoy doing in my life is reading books. So I have to make that differentiation of right now it's work, and now I have to take notes but now it's just the fun of reading a book that is an old friend that doesn't have any tabs in it. But if you were to see the book, it's super creased on the binding and all the pages are starting to wear thin because they've been read so many times. I do try and make room for that kind of stuff. I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm not one of those people who like Netflix and chills or whatever. Yeah. It's not my thing. I don't watch lots of movies. I would much rather use my imagination and enjoy the written word. So it's just what I do.
Do you have a favorite book?
No, I don't have a favorite book.
Do you have a favorite book that's in the realm of your research that has really impacted you or changed your way of thinking in it in a drastic way that's memorable?
So it's really interesting. When I first started my research, I wasn't actually looking into followership at all. I I was in politics. I was studying international relations. That was the field that I got my PhD in. And I was actually looking at weapons of mass destruction proliferation.
Fun.
Yeah, very much. And I was specifically looking at how Western states were responding to WMD proliferation by non-state actors, by terrorist organizations. And then I came across this book by Robert Kelly on followership. And I was reading it and I was like, I could totally apply this to states. Like I could take the whole Western world and start looking at how they acted as followers in response to United States leadership. Instead of saying, oh, the United States leader, it was like, hey, let's figure out if the United States was really leading and what kind of leadership they were able to engage and what kind of followers they had. So Robert Kelly's work on followership was sort of my first dive into it. So I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's definitely the thing that opened my eyes to the idea that followership existed as a concept. And from there, it was like, let's deep dive into this topic. So there's Barbara Kellerman and there's Ira Shaloff who wrote about courageous followership. There's the Horowitzes who write about leadership and followership. It's become more of a field, and it's still a very small field.
And is that what motivates you to keep maybe researching and studying it because it's underdeveloped?
I think that's part of it. I think also from my experience working with friends who are in high tech, for them, the idea of leadership was like everyone's, you got to be a leader, you got to be a leader, you got to be a leader. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. You guys aren't thinking about what it means to be good followers. You guys aren't thinking about this. And so people would come to me with their problems or issues they were having on their teams or some strategic issue they were having. And when we delved into it, very often part of the fundamental issue was poor followership. The people who were supposed to be doing the work were more argumentative. They weren't actually, disagreeing and committing. They weren't understanding that what they were presenting as was adversarial followership, and it meant that the teams weren't working smoothly together.
So let's break that down. What is the concept of followership?
Well, let's start by defining leadership then, because if we're gonna do that, let's start by leadership.
And this is this is what I meant by one of my first statements on the podcast now was that I think you present leadership in a unique way. Reading about leadership through followership, I think is very, very interesting. So please, let's start with leadership.
Okay, so leadership is a process, first of all. It's a process by which one unit takes other units, brings them together towards a specific vision, purpose, goal, or objective. And it does so by engaging very specific styles and manners and skills while understanding the level of the development of the follower. So think about that for a second. You need followers to be a leader. You can't be a leader without them. It's by definition, it's part of the definitional process of leadership. You need followers. Well, if you need followers, then the followers are what make you a leader. And at that point you go, well, then that's a choice. Followership, just like leadership, is a choice. You choose who you follow, and you choose how you follow. If you choose how you follow, then the way you follow matters. It impacts the capacity of leadership to be effective. It impacts the ability of leaders to get things done. It impacts their ability to say, hey, here's purpose, here's vision, let's move forward. And that, I think, is fundamentally forgotten by most people who consider or talk about leadership.
Well, we as a society are preached leadership, that everyone, everyone wants to be a leader. Everyone wants to be the man or woman, coming up with the best idea, influencing people and, having followers. It's literally, ingrained into our culture now. If you look at social media, we're judged by the number of followers that our profile has.
Exactly.
But thinking about being a positive follower, or adversarial follower, is that the split, positive versus?
No. So I would not split it. In fact, I would say there's a lot of different ways you can look at followership. Kelly, for instance, Robert Kelly, who we spoke about at the beginning, he gives us 5 major forms of followership. He gives us 2 variables to look at, how much we bring independent thinking and how proactive we are in our own things. And then he goes, okay, well, based on those 2 variables, you've got your adversarial follower. This is the person who he's still part of the team, whatever, but he's devil's advocating all the time. He's got his own way. He believes that the way we're doing it is wrong, and he's vocal about it, right? But then you got your sheep person, and that person has a lot of independent thinking, but is not proactive. They're not doing action. They're just simply talking out. Then the sheep who they're not proactive and they don't think for themselves. You got to prod them to get everything done. Then you move into, the proactive people. You got yes men. They're the people you can tell them what to do and they'll yes, and they'll do. And then you got the people who are proactive and they're independent thinking. Well, those are exemplary followers, according to Kelly. And then you got your pragmatist. And that's the person who doesn't sort of fit one of these molds on the average, on the norm, but like sort of always is moving around all the time. And most people go like, well, doesn't everybody move around all the time? And the answer is no. Actually, over time, when you look at a leadership process or a followership process, people tend to hold kind of their own, this is what the kind of person follower I've chosen to be with this leader on this topic. But that's only one of them. Barbara Kellerman brings a whole different variable. She says the only level is the level of engagement. When you talk about level of engagement, she goes, you've got your I remember the bottom one that she has there, but it's like the lone wolf, lone soldier does his own thing. Then you've got your bystander, then you've got your participant, then your activist, and then your diehard. And you go, well, that variable is just a little bit different because it's really about it's just about how engaged is a person. You can use them together. What's really interesting, you use these different ideas together and you go, well, you can have an activist, you can have like an exemplary activist, right? Someone who's independently thinking and participatory, and they are also, activists. They are out there trying to get other people involved in the process. They're not willing to die for the process. They're not diehard.
Is the ideal to be a diehard follower?
No, absolutely not.
So what is the ideal?
I think that running between participant and activist is probably the ideal in terms of level of engagement that we're looking for from people. On the whole, I think it's what we want from our kids. If you think about it for a minute, we want them to be participatory. We want them to be activist and like, oh, I see a problem, let me help resolve it. We want them to be exemplary followers. We prefer them to be exemplary followers, but at the same time, they're very often we'll even push them down and be like, no, I really just want you to be a yes man. Do what I say, and that's it. I don't want you to present independent thinking. And I think it's actually one of the fears of a lot of parents is when their kid starts to think for themselves and start presenting their own ideas and go, well, what about this? What about that? And it's very interesting because like this is something that applies from the family to like business, to media, to like international relations. This idea of leaders and followers, we apply it everywhere. We just don't see it. So,
but everyone, you don't see it, but everyone feels it, no? Because everyone's in a team to some degree, family, work, sports, whatever you do.
Yeah.
You are in a team, and I think the word followership is a bit scary, maybe for people to dedicate time to thinking about, because there's a lot of negative connotation to it. When people are afraid to be just followers, afraid to be looked at as sheepish. Mm-hmm. Is that ego?
I mean, part of it's hubris. Yeah, absolutely. There's an aspect of ego and hubris to it. I think part of it's society and culture, like you said before. We've for a very long time now spoken about being the leader and you want your kids to be leaders and people need to take on leadership roles. And we've kind of forgotten that really you need to have and be a follower to be a good leader. Most organizations, think about any organization that's got more than 10 people in it. In fact, 5 people. How many followers are there and how many leaders are there in that organization? Far more followers. Far more followers in any organization you're talking about. But most organizations nowadays focus on leadership. But the followers are the ones who execute. They're the ones who get things done. They're the ones who do all the work.
So is that what you teach? Thinking about followership in an objective way that makes sense to function?
So there's 3 things that I do with followership. When it comes to an organization, the organizations that I've worked with, when I've gone in, I've said, hey, try and focus a little bit on followership. It's more about making the leadership aware of how important followership is, because it's something that most leadership experts and people who come in and give sessions on leadership don't address, and how important it is to be able to analyze the types of followers you have. So that's one thing I do. Another thing that I will do with people is more on the intimate level of like, hey, let's do teamwork on followership. What kind of followers are people presenting at here on your team? And that's about people actually working with each other and saying, hey, I know you think you're presenting this way, but you're really presenting like this. Let's talk about how we change that. And then there's also that one-on-one work that I do where, people come to me and are like, hey, I want to be a leader. I'm like, great. How are you presenting your followership? And that's a real discussion, because people who are good at their job doesn't mean that they're going to be good leaders. But people who are good followers, like exemplary followers, tend to eventually make really good leaders. People who are activists and really good at their job and are, exemplary followers tend to make phenomenal leaders if they're courageous. That's a really big part of it is courageous followership. It's that ability to speak truth to power. Because if you're afraid to do that, if you're worried about it, if you don't have the internal sense of self to be able to come up and say, hey, this isn't a moral issue. This isn't a values issue. This is just, I think that there's a better way to do this issue, and I'm going to find the right way to do that. I'm going to the right way to talk about it to power. Then you can demonstrate.
So how do leaders in organizations find ways to incentivize followers to voice their opinions, to take those risks and be courageous?
I think that there's two things that leaders really do need to learn about. One is radical candor, and the other one is radical listening. Radical candor is, and I don't remember her name. She wrote the book called Radical Candor. But her whole premise is that when people need to give feedback, when people need to hear truth, first and foremost, you have to be able to speak truth. You have to be able to say, here's what's really going on, and be open and honest about it. But there's a second part to that. It's how well is what you're saying going to be received by the person who's hearing it? Not how well do you think you said it, but how well is the other person able to receive that information? What tone do you have to use? And I think that when you say, hey, how does leadership need to understand this? A big part of that is understanding that when they talk, their followers are going to hear it differently than they think they're saying it, and vice versa. Their followers need to be taught how the leader best hears things. And most leaders don't give a manual of like, here's how I work. Here's the best way to talk to me. Here's the best times to talk to me. If you're the kind of person who needs your coffee in the morning before people start bringing you their problems, and they don't know that about you, that can be a problem. And it sounds small in minutia, but in the reality, that's a very big deal. Or if you're the kind of person who right after lunch can't be spoken to for about a half hour because you need to digest your food before you start dealing with stuff, and your people don't know that, you're not enabling followership. You're making it hard for them. And those are super small examples, but it goes into the depth of it, where if you're the kind of person who always wants to know what's going on, and your people feel like you're micromanaging, and that's a fine balance. Like, yes, leaders need to know what's going on, but do they need to know everything that's going on all the time? Or do they need to know just enough to be able to do their part of the job? And I think that the other part of this, like I said, is the radical listening. Radical listening is about functionally not trying to respond. It's about listening to understand meaning behind what's being said. And that is super duper hard to do. Because most people, when they listen, they're listening in order to respond, not to learn. And if we want to learn, we have to put ourselves...
Or people get triggered early by certain words.
Right, which is also part of it, though. If you think about it, if you're letting yourself get triggered, you're not putting yourself aside to be an active listener. You're not engaging radical listening. Radical listening means even if I'm triggered, I'm going to put myself aside for a minute And go on assumption, which I know, if I'm allowed to use bad language here, makes an ass of you and me. I've heard that. But go on assumption that the person who's talking to me is not speaking in order to hurt me. They are not here to bring me down. They are not engaging their power in order to make me feel bad. They are engaging their power in order to help us reach mutual purpose and get a vision and hit our objectives and meet our goals.
So have you seen results, positive change results in an organization, both from the leadership and the followership side, just being exposed to the idea of followership and a spectrum of followership? Because I think your message, what it does, I think it empowers the followers. Is that the followers do have a role in the success of whatever the organization with the leader is trying to achieve. And you're maybe, as a follower, you're not necessarily a sheep, and there's a specific role that you can take upon yourself, a courageous role that will help you, will help the leader, and will help the organization as a whole.
100%. I think that, first of all, yes, I have seen positive change in organizations. Friends of mine who have come to me with their own personal, hey, I've had issues, have come back with, oh my God, that was amazing. I don't get that kind of feedback so much when I go to an organization. Organizations are more like, thank you very much for coming. This was great. And then afterwards I'll get an email like, hey, this has been really nice and we've seen some positive change. But it's not the same as when, a friend comes up to you and goes, yeah, oh my God, that was awesome, because you changed the trajectory of what was a disaster in the making into a huge success simply by having us engage differently with what was going on in our relationship between us and our leader, or between me and my followers.
Does that sometimes bring a difficult conversation to have with a friend, maybe saying that, hey, you're not a leader right now, and maybe you need to reevaluate your position, and you can be a very courageous, inspiring follower at this point in time?
That's an interesting question. So I want to break it down into two. There are people who hold leadership positions, and there are friends of mine who've held leadership positions who I have called out and said, you're not a leader, you're a manager. And they will all huff and puff at me. What do you mean I'm not a leader? Of course I'm a leader. I'm like, no. Everything you do, everything you talk about, how you discuss your role, how you discuss what you're doing is management. It's about resources and key performance indicators and making sure people hit their metrics and making sure things get done. That's not leadership. That's management. Leadership is about the relationship you have with these people, how you bring your styles to them, and how you understand their developmental level and how it helps you reach the goals that you've set. It's not the same thing. It's about the process you're working on. And all of a sudden you see them go, oh. And then it becomes a conversation. But at first, a lot of my friends who I've done that to, and I haven't done that to so many of my friends, but I've done that to enough of them, where you sort of see the balloon pop, and they realize that it was about their ego for a minute or two because they'd gotten a position or whatever. And then they started really rethinking what leadership meant for them. I have a friend who's now trying to move from a position of being a worker bee into a position of leadership. And he was like, I'm really worried because I've never held leadership before and everything. And I was like, but if you look at your life, you've done lots of leadership stuff. He's a Dungeons and Dragons, dungeon master. He's been doing that for years and years and years and years and years. And I was like, you realize that role fundamentally is a leadership position. You have to deal with all these different people who all have their own wants, their own needs, and their own ideas about what it means to play the game. And all are gonna, want to try and push back when you make a decision about how we're gonna do this. And you have to functionally deal with that. He was like, oh.
Excuse me if I'm belittling the position of a Dungeons and Dragons master, you said?
It's okay, yeah.
What does that entail?
Okay.
Dungeons and Dragons to me just takes me back to seeing my brother play when I was in elementary school. And I remember him going to some sort of a convention where he dressed up. That's my understanding of Dungeons and Dragons. I think I watched one of the movies they made as well, but I don't think it was very good.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
But so is it? What does he oversee? A lot of people?
So depending on the game, okay, so let's understand just a quick deep dive into Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game. So no, you don't have to get dressed up to play it. You can literally just come as you are. But it's people sitting around a table, and they create personas, and then they bring these personas into a fantasy world or a developed world that the dungeon master has established for them, and they go on all kinds of missions, or they'll go on all kinds of I don't even know what the right word is. They go through life, this alternative reality, that
without the machines,
without anything. Like it's just imagination. And when some people will play with some little figurines and stuff on the table to be able to say, I'm moving my person from here to here, so that everybody can visualize it really well. But the dungeon master's role is to keep the story moving. The dungeon's master role is to make sure that everybody's following the rules and everyone's playing their role within this game well. It's about making sure that certain key objectives are hit along the way in the storyline. It's about making sure everyone knows how other people are feeling about how play is going, and when play is going badly, how to resolve conflict between players. Because one player wants to do this and another player wants to do that, or one player doesn't think that this is being done fairly, this game is being played fairly, and the dungeon master has to mediate those different conflicts. And
do you play?
I do. I'm guilty of playing.
How many years have you been playing?
So I played when I was younger for about 12 years, and then I took a break, and then about 5 years ago I started playing again.
How many people play worldwide?
Oh, lots.
It's a huge game.
It's a huge game, and Corona bumped it up a whole bunch because suddenly people were playing online. It was a way for people to connect. I actually know a few games that started, specifically once Corona had started, people were like, hey, I'm thinking about playing this. Would you want to join? And people did. Because it got people out of the reality of Corona as well, which is nice. You could suddenly go on an adventure and you'd hear about, you're climbing up a stormy, icy peak, and all of a sudden a werewolf shows up out of nowhere. What do you do? And all of a sudden you have to live that life, and it's kind of cool.
So you're living this alternate reality, really, that we hear a lot about now with AI and how, augmented reality and all these different things, all this new technology that is going to transport us to another dimension where we're able to live whatever life we want to live, whatever mission we want to tackle. But here you have people that do it all along without technology, just with your brain.
Yeah, just imagination. And really, if you think about it, the imagination is endless. Like you can play games that are science fiction games. There are science fiction role-playing games. There's fantasy games. There's so many.
Do you think it helps you, besides the entertainment and joy that comes with playing? Do you think it helps you in other aspects of your life?
In my life, personally?
Just having this, using your brain for this fictional reality.
Oh, 100%. I think that as we get older, we tend to lose our imagination in a lot of ways, unless you're specifically in a field which engages imagination on a regular basis, creativity on a regular basis. A lot of people tend to become less imaginative and less creative as we get older, unless you specifically work those muscles. And those are, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I know a little bit about neuroplasticity. And if you don't use the neural pathways, they start to deteriorate, right? And so you become less creative, you become less engaged, less able to engage those neural pathways. And I think Dungeons and Dragons is just one of many, many ways that people can engage their creativity. And their imagination. And I think that if we think about what it means to be creative, it starts with the idea. It starts with something that struck your brain, and it started some sparks going off. And all of a sudden you go, wow, I can start doing this and I can start doing that.
And no one can explain where these ideas come from, right?
So if we look at, I'm a firm believer that the core of power is ideas. Ideas are what get any power process started. Power processes go through, like, you get hit by an idea and all of a sudden you start to strategize, and then what can I bring to the table and what effects do I want to have, and then how can I maneuver, and then start taking action. You can sort of maybe garner where some ideas come from. Like, for instance, if you go back in your own history and look at how your parents influenced you and how your family influenced you and how your society influenced you and things like that, some of your ideas you can sort of be like, oh, that came from my parents. That concept came from here. But when it comes to a new idea, more often than not, you have no idea where it came from. No clue. Terry Pratchett has a really great description of this. He's talking about one of the characters in his book has this unfortunate situation where he seems to be a receptacle for the sparks of ideas, and they just hit his brain in the middle of the night, and he'll wake up and his sheets are covered in drawings of different machines and things like that. And you go, well, yeah, it's sort of like you're daydreaming, and all of a sudden you've got a great idea. You're in the middle of the night, you wake up and suddenly you realize you need a pen and paper next to you because let me write that down before I forget it. And really, the worst thing to have happen, I think, is when you have a great idea and it escapes you. Or you have this wonderful idea and you didn't have enough time or enough capacity to get it written down or get it down somewhere where you can revisit it and even make it, bolster it and make it, and it's gone. And good luck trying to get it back. Like, it doesn't happen. So,
for those only listening to the podcast and who are not seeing us on the video, if you are, head to YouTube, you'll see us on the video, or the website. You're sitting here in a wheelchair.
Correct.
And again, I don't mean that in a way to define what you are, but you are sitting here in a wheelchair, and you do have a pretty intense, interesting story behind it, how you got to where you are today. So can we unravel that? Where did everything start, and where you are today with your situation? And because I based on my reading about you, it started with an ankle injury.
Yeah.
So do you mind taking us from that ankle injury all the way to today? And again, I know it's a lot. We can stop. We can take turns as the story progresses.
Sure.
But it's a really interesting one, and we're talking about CRPS, which is, I wrote it down so I don't mispronounce it anyway, complex regional pain syndrome.
Correct.
How common is CRPS?
CRPS is about it's about 1 to 150 to 200,000 people. And when you're talking about the average statistic, I don't fall within that statistic, which I can explain in a little bit why, but it's basically because it spread from one limb to another limb in me, and that makes me unique amongst people who have what I've got. But you asked how it started, so I'm gonna start from the beginning, and we can work our way from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know that you're a soldier in the military, and yeah. So take it from there.
Okay. So I joined the Israeli Defense Forces in 2000, and I was 23 years old, so I was a little bit older than the average soldier. I had actually moved to Israel on my own when I was 20 years old, and I knew that I needed to sort of figure myself out, but I knew I wanted to go into the army. I ended up in Maglan, which is one of the commando units of the IDF. I did basic training, did jump school, and then we have advanced training, and then you move into the unit and start doing specializations. When I was in advanced training, one of the things that we do there is we practice removing a wounded comrade from the field of battle. It's called I don't know what it's called in English. I'm sure there's a word for it, but in Hebrew it's called echad al echad. It's when you lift someone up onto your shoulders, and literally you're carrying him and all of his weight, and you've got to just book it. Move
I think everyone has seen this image, maybe some photograph or a movie with a soldier.
You've seen it somewhere where someone comes up, you know, one arm under the legs, one arm grabs the body, pulls it up on your shoulders, roll and start moving. So I was in the middle of an exercise, and my commander was like, David, the heavy machine gunner has fallen down wounded. Go get him. And I, of course, being a diehard, to put it back into the field of followership, I was very much a diehard. Like, I was prepared to die doing what I was doing. Okay, run, grab him, pick him up, start to move, and I put my foot on a rock or something. I'm not even sure what, and all of a sudden it was like clack, and my ankle, like, it feels like a burst of like pain in my ankle. My leg crumpled underneath me. I dropped him on his head. I got yelled at. I found out later that he was cursing me out. I didn't even know the words in Hebrew that he was saying. Apparently, like, totally cursing me out. And my commanders were yelling at me. They're shooting at you. They're shooting at you. Get him. So I, being a diehard, didn't go, wait, I'm hurt. I picked him up and I got to the safe wall. I put him down. They checked my leg and they were like, oh, it's just a sprain. Walk on it. You'll be fine. I didn't see a doctor for like 5 or 6 days. Finally saw a doctor and he was like, oh, it's...
But it must have, I'm assuming did it swell up the next day?
It was swollen. And they were just saying, you know, it's just a sprain. Just walk on it. It'll be fine. I think part of that was my own motivation of, I don't want to give up. I'm not going to let anything stop me, which is part of the nature of diehard. Like, diehards really are, like, there's a reason why their name is diehard.
And you're incentivized by the system to keep pushing and not quitting and
100%,
keep going.
Especially, there was a saying that got thrown at me a lot. I can't means I don't want to. In Hebrew, it was I. You know, it's not I can't. It's I don't want to.
Yeah.
Well, that means if you want it, you can do it. And I wanted it. I wanted to be a commando. I wanted to be an officer. Like, even today, I give talks in the Army where I tell my story, and then as part of that, I include followership and leadership and things like that. I think every single talk I've ever given, at some point, I've said something on the nature of, if somebody were to tell me today, hey, David, we want you to come back to Miluim to reserve duty, I would do it at the drop of a hat. And I would do it even more so if somebody were to say to me, hey, David, we want to send you to officers school. My family and I have already come to an agreement on this one. If anyone were to ever say that to me, everybody knows I'm gone. Like, I'm going to do this thing. It's something which is so much a missing thing in my life. So anyway, I was very much that kind of diehard. And I mean, even today, I guess you could say, I sort of have that diehard mentality about that service and about serving my people. Anyway, the story goes as follows.
So you saw the doctor 5 days later.
Saw the doctor 5 days later. And he's like, oh yeah, it's just a sprain. Relax for a week and you'll be fine. Now, relaxing for a week just meant not going out into the field. It still meant I was doing guard duty, and it meant that I was on my foot all the time, and it meant I was walking. It wasn't like sit down, put your foot up, ice it, rice it, do whatever. No, it was really like actively moving. Ended up doing several route marches that were quite long, 70 kilometers, long route marches.
Yeah, was that 40 miles for the
Americans?
Americans?
Yeah, it's like 40 miles.
It's a long way. Yeah.
It's a long walk, and it was in the middle of winter, which means mud, and each foot weighs like 20 kilos, like 10 pounds because of just the amount of mud that was stuck to my feet. My leg was really hurting. I had these like burning pain that would start in my ankle and would shoot up to my knee
On one side only?
Only on my right leg. I got to the unit. We finished advanced training. I moved into specializations. They sent me to sniper school. And somewhere in the middle there, it became really clear that my leg was really messed up. I couldn't walk on it right. And when I was running, instead of running, I would take 2 hops on my left leg, put my right foot on the ground, and sort of like just barely touch it just to get a little bit of movement, and then 2 more jumps on my left leg.
Have you hurt your ankle before that moment in your life up until that point?
I'd had like...
did you know the feeling of a normal ankle sprain?
I'd had a normal ankle sprain, but it had never been anything like that. This was something completely...
It felt extreme to you.
Yeah, it was extremely different. And I mean, at some point when I was like 12 or 13, on my left leg. I had sprained my left ankle I fell into the pool. I put my foot on the side of the pool wrong and I twisted it, and they thought it was broken or whatever, and it wasn't, and they checked it and they were like, it's fine. And within 2 weeks, I was back on my feet and running, and I was fine. And so, I mean, I knew what an ankle sprain felt like, and I think had I been more, I want to say more mature, but I don't know if that's really the right way. I think if I'd been less of a diehard, and I also think if I'd had family here to say, hey, David,
take a look at this.
Let's take a look at this.
Someone needs to.
We need to fix this. I think the fact that I was a lone soldier and I didn't have family here who had that sense of personal responsibility for me made it even easier for me to push myself without the checks and balances that would normally come into play.
So you're at this stage where evidently you can't even run properly on your foot. So
I had seen 3 doctors. They were like, you need surgery. You need surgery. The first doctor was like, I'm going to put 3 holes in your legs and you're going to be off your feet for 6 months.
But what did they find?
I had torn 2 ligaments, completely torn 2 ligaments in my right ankle. Completely torn. They were ripped. First guy was like, I'm going to put like 3 holes in your bones and we're going to strap it up. And then I was like, can I have a second opinion? And the second opinion was like, I'm going to put 6 holes in your bones and metal and it'll be there forever. And I was like, can I please have a third opinion? Third opinion guy goes, I don't need to put holes in your bones. I'm going to take what's left. We're going to clean it off. I'm going to stretch it a little bit and wrap it around the muscle. You'll be up and running in 6 months. And he literally looked me in the eye and he went, you're going to run like a panther. And I was like, I'll be able to go to officer school? He said, oh yeah. I was like, yes. And I was sold. And then I was like, tomorrow? I literally asked him if we could do it the next day. And he looked at me and went, I'm leaving for the States for 4 months to do, I don't remember what. He was doing some kind of specialization or something and he was going to be back. And I was like, so the moment you get back, he's like, well, technically there are people who are worse off than you and they're already online. So you're going to have to wait. I was like, how long? About 6 months. Well, I went back to my unit, and being back in my unit, I was, it meant I was on my legs, and I was moving, and I was working, and I was working, and I was working. About 3 weeks before the surgery, the doctor of the unit saw me running, and he was like, David, stop. And I didn't want to because I was in the middle of I had some serious work to do, and he was like, no, stop, put everything down. You're going home. I don't want to go home. Going home to me meant going to my room on a kibbutz in southern Israel alone. I had an adopted family and they're wonderful people and I love them dearly and I'm still in touch with them and they're great. But I didn't have family, right? So it was
and it's not what you were there to accomplish.
And it wasn't what I was there for. I was there to work. I was prepared to sacrifice, quite literally, everything for the Jewish people. That's where I was at. So I really wasn't prepared to stop. And he had to forcibly tell me, you're going home. In retrospect, there's a good reason for that. 3 weeks before surgery and my leg was swollen from all the work I was doing on it. It probably needed those 3 weeks of not doing quite as much.
So at this point, you're already 3 weeks before surgery. It's been already, those 4 months are almost up.
Yeah.
You've been all that time, you've been operating in your unit.
I was a sniper specialist. So I was working. Either I was training or I was helping people or I was working. One of those 3. And I was on my legs all the time. And I was running everywhere. And it got to the point where I could barely stand, and I didn't show anyone. When I was the moment I was on my go off base uniform, I was not going to show anybody that I was hurting, and I was in so much pain even at that point. And then they did the surgery, and the doctor seeing me go into the operating room was like, "What's going on? Why are you limping so badly?" I'm like, "My leg really, really hurts." He's like, "Well, we'll fix that, and it'll be fine." Middle of the surgery, I'm awake. Because they numbed the area and gave me a little bit of something to put me on cloud 9, but I was awake. Middle of the surgery, I felt this sharp pain in my ankle, and I was just like, oh! And he's like, "What? You can feel that?" And I was like, "Yes, I can feel that." And it took him 5 extra shots in the area to numb it enough for them to continue the surgery. I was in a cast for 3 months.
You're describing everyone's nightmare.
Yeah, I'm so
heading
sorry.
into surgery.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's good. It's good stuff to know about. So you're awake during the surgery, and the surgery is
progressing.
It started.
And
progressing.
I can feel them like pulling on my leg and moving stuff around and stuff. And at some point, I felt him touch something. It was some kind of nerve. If we're talking, it's probably touching a nerve of some kind. And I felt it, and it was really, really intense pain. And he was shocked that I was able to feel it at all. And it took them 5 extra shots. They literally gave me 5 extra shots in order to numb the area enough for them to continue with the surgery. I get out of the surgery with a cast from my toes up to my ankle. And my leg doesn't feel very good in there, but it's after surgery. Like, okay, you've basically been beaten with a baseball bat as they move everything around and pull everything. I have to be in.
But from the perspective of the doctor, was it a successful procedure?
As far as he was concerned, it was a very successful procedure. He literally said to me as I was going out of the surgery, again, he was like, 6 months from now, you're going to be running. And I was on cloud 9 at that point, like both on cloud 9 in terms of I was still a little bit woozy, but also on cloud 9 in the sense of like I was going to get back to doing what I wanted to be doing. Got back to the kibbutz, and it became very clear very quickly that I couldn't take care of myself. And they moved me into an old age home on the kibbutz so that there'd be people to take care of me. I stayed there for 3 months until they took the cast off. In the middle, they had to take the cast off because my foot was so swollen. My toes were purple, and it was very painful. And the doctor looked at it, and he's like, "Oh, it's fine." But as they're taking the cast off and putting the cast on, there was this really intense burning pain. And they were like, "Oh no, it's normal. Everything's going to be fine. Don't worry about it." They take the cast off after 3 months, and it feels, and I mean, taking a cast off isn't supposed to hurt. It's uncomfortable, but it's not supposed to hurt. It hurt when they were taking the cast off. This very intense sort of burning pain. And then they had to take the stitches out on my ankle. And the nurse tells me to lie down on the bed, and she's like, "This will take 2 minutes, no problem." And she comes and she takes the tweezers and she goes to start peeling out the first stitch. And she touches and starts to pull, and it feels like someone's taking a flaming needle and jabbing it into my ankle. And I immediately saw black, almost passed out, and everything that I had eaten for lunch just came out all over the floor. And the doctor jumps up, "What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?" And I'm like, it burns so bad. And they're like, hold on, we'll get it. And they literally had to like sort of hold me down. And the nurse is sitting there going, tuck, 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 tuck. And she's like pulling on these things. And I feel like someone's jabbing me over and over again with this burning needle, like something's stabbing into my ankle. At the end of the whole thing, she goes, what happened? And I was like, I don't know, it burns. And it hurt to like put my foot on the ground. It hurt to just rest my foot on the ground. My foot didn't want to stay on the ground. It kept jumping up. And the doctor looked at me and he's like, "Look, physical therapy, everything's going to be fine." I started doing physical therapy 5 days a week, really, really intense. Hydrotherapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, everything you can think of.
What did the physical therapy entail on that point?
So at that point, it was
because you're describing as like you're almost incapable of putting your foot on the ground. So
right.
What were they working with you that you were able to do?
So it started out at the beginning. The doctors and the physical therapists were very insistent that I try and do weight bearing. It was the very first thing. They were like, "Let's get back to weight bearing. Let's get back to you walking normally. You're on crutches, but let's get you back to using your foot on a regular basis." And nobody at that point thought nerve damage. Nobody mentioned nerve damage. There was no. If you go back to my medical documents, at no point does it say he has nerve damage. It was simply this idea of rehabilitation. Let's rebuild the muscle. Let's rebuild your flexibility. That was a big part of it. They were very worried that after the surgery and after 3 months in a cast, that the ankle was going to be stuck, and they wanted me to really start moving it. So it was put weight on it, put weight on your toes to get your ankle flexibility up again. Doing a lot of heel to toe work, where it was like put your foot down and really roll the foot. And every time I had to do it, my foot, I was literally fighting my leg from my leg wanted to jump off the ground. And I had to fight that feeling in order to do what they were asking. And I was determined to do what they were asking. So I fought it. 3 months later, I see the doctor and there's zero progress. In fact, there's regression, if anything. My foot was swollen. It was purple. It had this like crusty sort of thing on it because I couldn't wash it without feeling intense burning. Every time water would go over it, every time I would try and scrub it, my leg, I would come close to passing out from my own touch. It hurt to put socks on. It hurt, like I was in so much pain.
You must have been freaking out to an extent at that point.
Freaking out, yeah. It was more than that. Like there was, I mean, if we want to really get into it, at some point, because I was back in my room on my own on kibbutz, at some point I had decided I needed to use the bathroom, so I didn't want to use the crutches that I had because I hadn't yet gotten good pair. It was like these old, rickety, not so comfortable crutches. So I was like, okay, I'll just jump on my left leg to the bathroom. I jumped to the bathroom, used the bathroom, and I guess my left foot got wet or something. So I start jumping back the other way, and my foot slipped out from underneath me. My right foot's like tapped onto the ground, and I found myself flat on my back, looking at the ceiling, crying my eyes out. And it was a real question of like, why should I continue? Like, what's the purpose here? Why am I doing this? And it was like, I've said it before in talks that I give. I came like this close to being like, why would I continue my life with this? Because this is that bad. And I have friends who've had this, who've made that choice. And it's like, that's an intense thing to say, but like, I have friends who've ended their life because they had CRPS and couldn't live with the pain. And to tell you why I was able to pull myself onto my bed, cry for the next, I don't know how long, and then get up and continue on, I can't give you a definitive, here's why that happened.
Do you remember deciding?
It was very much a decision. That I can tell you. It was very much I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. No way. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not a quitter. I'm not giving up. No chance. And it was a lot of self-talk. It was like, even then, like I can remember having this almost long debate with myself about why it's important for me to continue. And some of it was kind of interesting because I had a couple of friends who were coming to visit me in like over time, and I had the kibbutz family who would come and knock on my door and check in on me every once in a while. So there were people who were checking in on me, so that was part of it, and that was part of the reason was I didn't want anyone to find me like that. But part of it was also just this internal thing of like, I may be a diehard, but I don't want to die without purpose. Like, no, that's not who I am. It's not what I would want. I would rather push through this, and I'm going to make the best of this situation, which sucks. And it was really hard. It was a lot of work with psychologists. I think a lot of it was about acceptance. Back then, it wasn't even that because I was doing therapy 5 days a week, like I said, in hydrotherapy.
And you still had, so going through all this therapy, you still had hope that you'll get better.
100%.
And you'll run as the doctor promised you in a
100%.
few months. What did the hydrotherapy? If you mind describing what hydrotherapy is?
Sure. So hydrotherapy is, in this case, it's work in a warm pool. So that the weight bearing would be less. It was also about being able to get my leg used to the idea of being in water. I had been a swimmer in high school, and I love the water. Even today, I still do hydrotherapy. It's one of the most painful and also one of the most natural environments for me to be in. The nature of it was, in the deeper water, it would be about moving my legs so that muscle deterioration would be lessened. It was about keeping the water flowing over my legs so that even though it was painful, just trying to get the body used to having that feeling and not destroying my jaw and screaming out loud every time I did it. A lot of it was very active movement of the leg. Is when it was one leg, very active movement of the leg. In terms of within the water, okay, let's take, one of those noodles and we're going to try and put it under your toes, try and push it down. Just try and push it down a little bit. Just try and push it down a little bit. Just try and get used to that idea that like it's gonna actively engage the different muscles, the muscles of the shin, the muscles of the calf, get the tendon, get the Achilles heel to really start stretching out a little bit, moving your toes and stretching your toes out onto the noodle. It was super painful. And I would come home and cry, and I would need to recover for hours afterwards. But the whole purpose was, I'm going to get up and walk. I'm going to get up and run. I have purpose behind this pain. There's no purpose behind the pain that I'm suffering. Eventually I came to the realization that there doesn't have to be a purpose behind the pain. It just is. And that realization was, this just is, and there doesn't have to be a purpose behind it, was a huge epiphany for me, because it meant that I didn't have to fight the pain as much. Because up until that point, I was fighting the pain all the time.
So your focus switched to accepting the pain rather than trying to get rid of the pain.
Right. At some point, so I'll get back to the story, and I think it'll help clarify when that happened. After about 3.5 months, I saw the doctor who'd done the surgery, and he looked at me and was like, something's wrong. I think you have nerve damage. I want to send you to a specialist. He sent me to a specialist. Took me 2 months to see the specialist, just because of the nature of, getting an appointment and whatever. See the specialist, and he goes, lie down on the bed. I lie down on the bed. He says, close your eyes. And all of a sudden, I felt like someone had taken a blowtorch and was burning the side of my foot. And my eyes flew open. And I look at him, and he's holding a ball of cotton in his hand, and he's gently tickling the side of my foot. And he saw my eyes fly open. He saw my eyes fly open, and he was like, okay, stop. Listen. There are 3 major issues. First things first. You have something called, and at the time it was called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. It's since then the name's been changed. You have RSD, CRPS. This pain that you have, it's on the McGill pain scale. It's the worst known chronic pain disorder to modern medicine. We don't know anything more painful. I was like, okay, what does that mean? And he showed me the pain, like he gave me some literature, because he understood that I was really into understanding the research, even though I wasn't a doctor then. I hadn't even started my degree. And like, it's more painful than childbirth without an epidural. Like, it's super painful, and it's all the time. And he goes, okay, you have this. I was like, okay, so fine. What does that mean? He goes, well, we don't know how to solve it. We don't have medicine that will make this better. All we can do is try and mitigate it and maybe reverse it through therapy, which is really when I started that more intense level of therapy, where I was going in, 5 days a week or 3 days a week to the CRPS clinic, and I was doing hydrotherapy, and it got even more intense, where there was a real purpose behind everything we did. We did, touch therapy. They would take different kinds of cloth and try and rub it on my foot to just try and get my foot used to the feeling of having something rubbing against it. And I would be screaming the whole time. I would come out of it hoarse and exhausted. And then he looks at me and he goes, there's a couple other things you need to know. It's the worst pain. We don't have medicine. It can spread. At which point my mind went, what? Excuse me? It's not enough it's going to stay in my foot. And actually really quickly it started to spread. It started to spread from my foot up to my middle of my shin. It sort of got stuck there for a few years. During that time, I was doing really intense therapy, and the doctor was really not happy with what was going on, because I was driving from Kibbutz Saad in a cab to Tel Aviv, where the therapy was.
It's a long drive, yeah.
It was an 1.5-hour drive. And he was like, your drive is actually taking everything that we do and destroying it, because you're driving back. You're already tired. You're already wiped out. So he wanted me to move to the Tel Aviv area. And I was like, what am I going to do here? I don't know. And he's like, David, why don't you start studying? So I moved to the area. I started studying. And once I started studying and I was doing therapy, things changed a little bit. Because I had movement in my life. I wasn't stuck in, I'm just going to be dealing with this thing. It was, I'm going to be dealing with this thing, but I'm also moving somewhere in my life. I'm working towards something else, and it gave me a way to distract myself. One of the things that I was very lucky to have is roommates who were very understanding. I rented out 2 of the rooms in the apartment. It was a 4-room apartment. I rented out 2 of them. My office had a sign on it. On one side, it said, knock, see if you can come in. The other side said, don't touch the door. There's a homicidal hobbit inside. And people knew that if the sign was out with the homicidal side, it meant I was just dealing with pain, and I needed that closed space to sort of let it all out without taking it out on the world around me. And I was very lucky that I had roommates who were so understanding of it.
And did the pain fluctuate at the time? Was it worse at certain times than others?
Oh yeah, 100%. Even now, weather and stuff can make it worse. It's always there. It's just a question of how bad is it at any given point in time, and what's causing what are the major triggers that are going on at the moment. But like even right now, my pants hurt. I'm wearing booties. They hurt. The plate that my feet are resting on, my feet are like not wanting to stay on it. So like I'm slowly like not putting them down. I'm sort of holding them in the air so that they're not being touching it. I have a shield in order to protect my legs from people accidentally touching me. It's intense.
For the people also that cannot see, it's literally a shield that covers your knees, thighs, legs, all over.
Yeah, from my knees down on my wheelchair. It's something that was made special for me by Elbit through an organization called Restart. And it was made for me to protect my legs so that, I can go out into the rain or out with people who don't know me and who might accidentally go, hey, David, it's, how you doing? Smack me on the leg, which happened before I had this thing. And it would cause extreme pain. And I would have to go home right away. And this gives me that little bit of
protection. So I'm taking you back now to the CRPS therapy. So you moved to closer to the clinic. You're going in 3 to 5 times a week for intense therapy. What does CRPS therapy entail of? Because they're telling you that they don't have a medication, a solution per se. So what is the game plan at that point?
So I think it's changed a lot over time, but back then, which we're talking 20 years ago right now.
Yeah, so early 2000s.
It was 2002, 2003. Back then, it was a lot of touch therapy. It was a lot of movement therapy where it was just lying on my back and put your feet in the air and wiggle your toes, wiggle your ankle. We did mirroring therapy where they would have my leg behind a mirror and I'd only be able to see my left foot and the mirror image of it, and they would say move your left foot, and the idea that it was somehow going to retrain my brain to think that what I was seeing was my right foot moving and healthy and everything was okay. It was an attempt to trick the brain, as it were.
So, but with the hope that it can fix itself?
Yeah. So the whole idea was, can we reverse the process? Can we somehow make this stop? And before it gets so bad that it's just irreversible. And even now, there are people out there who go, it's not irreversible. It's, your brain is like we talked about neuroplasticity before. Neuroplasticity doesn't disappear when we get older. It's just harder to do. So you could still retrain the brain and right. So what's interesting is that CRPS starts in a limb, but then at some point that the function that's causing the pain is no longer in the limb. It's in the central nervous system. It's in the brain. And what happens is that the brain then takes over and is sending the wrong message down back to the limb saying, ow, 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 ow. It's not that there's something actually necessarily wrong with limb. In my case, there's a really good likelihood that some of my nerves got damaged from the excessive use on a busted ankle and the swelling and everything else and the surgery together probably damaged some of those nerves.
But they didn't know at the time to tell you that something specific happened at surgery that maybe caused nerve damage.
Right. They couldn't say it was the surgery. They couldn't say it was the ankle sprains and the continued use on my leg. It was this plus that together. But I was already feeling pain when I was in the Army.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty good chance that it's...
So you're going to it for intense therapy almost on a daily basis. You feel it spreading to the middle part of your shin. And then what happens after that?
Okay, so it's...
And at this point, your left leg is absolutely fine. It's functioning.
My left leg is perfectly fine. I'm on crutches most of the time. I have
in order to relieve any touch or stress on that right leg?
Yeah, I was in my house. I had a walker, and what I would do is it was one of those walkers that has a seat part to it, and it was on wheels. And I would use that in my house. I would put my knee on the walker, and I would use it to roll around my house as my way of like being able to be functional. So I would cook. So I would stand when I was cooking on my left leg, and I'd have my right knee resting on the walker, and my foot would sort of be dangling off out into space so that nothing was touching it. I didn't wear a sock. I didn't wear a shoe. I would only put socks on when I was going out of my house. And I couldn't put a shoe on. A shoe was too painful. The pressure of the shoe it was too much. My body couldn't handle it. But I would put socks on, really warm socks. And at the time I would actually put on a sandal so that if I needed to rest my foot on the ground, I would do that. But it was always a fight to rest my foot on the ground. It was something I had to actively do as opposed to, that passive sort of, hey, you're standing, so just put your foot on the ground. Yeah. I had to actively tell myself, put your foot on the ground and leave it there. And then I started dating, and I met my future wife. And very soon after we got married, which was in 2006, it started to spread up to my knee. And there was nothing that could have said, hey, this is going to happen. It was just, I woke up one day and it was burning more. And all of a sudden I started feeling pains in like my upper shin. And then all of a sudden it was like, couldn't touch that area. It was too painful. It was too much. And it got up to the knee, and it was in 2008, I think. By 2008, I was already like, even when I tried to use the walker in our house, it wasn't so easy. I could do it, but it wasn't easy. And even then, I wasn't doing as much therapy because at that point, doctors were looking at me and going, there's not much we can do. Come in a few times a week, come in, once every few months for a checkup. But there's not much we can do in terms of therapy anymore. I was still in psychotherapy. It was important. But there was no real hope at that point of anything.
With the psychotherapy, was there the hope that the psychotherapy could actually help your condition, or was the psychotherapy about dealing with your current situation?
It was about dealing with the current situation. I don't think there was any thought that, seeing psychologists or psychiatrists or anything like that was going to somehow alleviate the pain. I think it was more about finding mechanisms and means to accept and cope with the pain. It was more coping mechanisms than anything else. And it was a lot of talk therapy. We did try hypnosis. I did all kinds of experiments. They tried me for a ketamine test to see if I could do a ketamine coma. And that freaked me out because I read about it, and they were like, yeah, like 50% of the people don't even wake up from this. And I was like, I do not think this is a good idea. But it wouldn't have mattered because when they did the ketamine test on me, it wasn't working. So it doesn't matter. Like it wouldn't have functionally been, like, wouldn't have worked. So, okay, so there's no point.
Yeah. And with these experimental therapies, or maybe some other alternative therapies that you tried, were you doing this pretty early on now? So we're talking like a couple years after the development of this?
Okay, so I don't think I've ever given up on the idea of doing therapy. It's just a question of what kinds of therapy I'm doing. I still do hydrotherapy.
Yeah.
I still do hydrotherapy once a week now. It's more for my soul than for my legs. But we do therapy. So what happened was, in terms of therapies, the nature of the therapies changed over time from we're going to make this better to how do we make sure this doesn't get worse? Or how do we make sure that the parts of your body that you can move don't get negatively impacted by whatever's going wrong with you?
And you're noticing it getting worse because it is slowly spreading.
Right. So slowly I'm seeing it spread. And the issue with that is, well, there's, muscle deterioration, my skin is like all my hair on my legs is gone. My toenails, I hate cutting my toenails. Cutting my toenails is torture. And we do it when my wife finally looks at my toenails and goes, David, I can't stand your toenails anymore. Cut them now. And I will. And it's this huge event that we know will be, I have to get ready for it emotionally. Then it's going to happen. I clench my jaw. I have a night guard, which I wear when I'm going to be doing something which I know will touch my legs, because I clench. Put the night guard in, clench, clip, and then I need like 2 hours of recuperation time just to be able to get back to functional after cutting my toenails. So, and that sounds crazy. Like, who needs 2 hours to get over a toenail cut? I do. That's just the nature of it. In 2009, 2010, I started feeling numbness in my left leg from the knee down. It was very weird and it was very uncomfortable. And it was happening when I was standing on my leg. And then middle of the night, I wake up and my whole body is drenched in sweat and I'd literally thrown up in my sleep. And my wife jumped up screaming, what's going on? What's going on? And she tried to pull the blanket off, and I would sleep with my right foot out of the bed and my left foot under the cover. And as she was pulling the blanket off my left foot, I was screaming, and pull it off, and my left foot basically looks like a deflated balloon, but like sort of full, still sort of full of air, puffy, purple, yellow. It was gross. We have pictures of it. It was disgusting.
Just happened overnight.
Happened overnight. And it was my left foot. And from there, it jumped like very quickly from my left foot whoop, up to my left knee. It took about 6 months and it stopped. It was stuck there. Even now, I sort of feel like a little bit of tingly above the knees. And every time that happens, I like start rubbing my legs on the thighs to like be like, nope, this is not happening. You are not moving above these knees. Not a chance. But it's more of that self-talk of like, I'm not going to let this happen to the extent that I can. So 2010, now we're talking, 13 years later. So I immediately found myself in a wheelchair, which was a whole different ballgame. And in a wheelchair, first of all, the world was not the most handicapped accessible place when I started this process. I was one of the first people at my university to start trying to make it handicapped accessible back in 2002. In 2010, I had to relearn what that meant because I suddenly found myself in a chair all the time. And being in a chair is a whole different experience because now it's, hey, I want to go from here to there. Well, how bumpy is the road between here and there? Because the bumps hurt and cause extreme pain. How many bricks am I going to have to go over in order to get from here? Is there a ramp to get up onto the sidewalk? Every place I go, I mean, even coming here, one of the things I asked was, hey, is this place handicapped accessible? Because I can't make that guarantee that wherever I'm going is going to be like that.
I mean, you know, how do you deal with it when a place isn't, or if something is just not physically accessible to you? I can only imagine the frustration, but how do you deal with it? Have you accepted it?
I think I've pretty much accepted it at this point. Most of it's kind of on the level of I don't tend to go places like that. And if I do have to go someplace like that, I'll do the best that I can with what I got. I mean, because I've been doing this for 20 years, the public sphere has changed tremendously in that time period. It went from being almost completely inaccessible to being pretty accessible in most places.
I was in Georgia, the country, a few weeks ago, Tbilisi, Georgia, and they have all these underground tunnels. So that there aren't that many crosswalks to cross because the roads there in the city are pretty wide. So they have these underground tunnels, and they were, I think 100% of the ones that I saw were handicap accessible. So I remember walking through those tunnels and seriously impressed. And it's definitely noticeable that nowadays things are more accessible, and to help you get to where you need to get,
Right.
and not get that frustration or not feel excluded in any way.
So
Also, thank you for drinking, because one of the things I forgot to tell you before the podcast, one was my rule is phones off. Number two is don't forget to drink.
Okay.
Because
I'm glad
I realize how we're always constantly talking.
Yeah,
so.
no problem. I'm glad to do that. Yeah, and as a lecturer, it's one of my fatal flaws is that when I get going as a professor, I could go and not drink. And so there was a time where I actually asked my students, hey guys, make sure I drink in the middle. Like,
Remind me.
Dr. Leitner, take a moment, you need to drink. And then it helped me pattern into starting to drink. So it was good. But yeah, I agree. So I'm going to agree with you. I think that the public sphere has become much more handicapped accessible. I would say that the next major obstacle that we have isn't the public sphere at all. It's your private sphere. It's, hey, a friend wants to invite you over and their house isn't accessible. It's that someone's throwing a birthday party for a friend of yours and you can't go because the place doesn't, it's got steps or there's no handicapped accessible bathroom. I would love to see that be the next major change in our society, is that any new house that's getting built, any new apartment that's getting built has to, by definition, have an accessibility plan to it, if not already be accessible. Just as functional, like just like you would ask in the public sphere for the people to do this, in your private sphere, it would be nice for our culture to move towards a state of actual accessibility and inclusion everywhere. I have friends who have changed their houses to include ramps because they want me around. I have friends who've realized that as they get older, they're going to need that ability anyway. So let's, when we're buying this house or, whatever, let's make sure it's accessible.
Have you found a community of individuals with CRPS that you can consult with, speak to, learn from?
So I was part of a support group for quite a few years. One of the things about the support groups, though, that I've been part of, it's more of a complaining group than a support group, and that wasn't what I was looking for. I was able to support, and I have supported young people who have CRPS or have suddenly found themselves facing this, to let them know that there's life after, and that it's possible to live life with and have children and be completely anxiety ridden that your children are going to cause you extreme pain, and they will. It's one of the major things. Yesterday, my daughter, who is 8 years old, and she is, a wonderful young lady, was having a normal 8-year-old tantrum. And she was, flopping her sleeves around, and she went right by me without thinking about it, flopping her sleeves, and one of the sleeves grazed my leg. And just that graze, and my body flew into spasms of pain. And I started hacking, and I almost threw up, and I was like, couldn't breathe. And I can't imagine what she felt from having to see that and experience it. But they've seen it and experienced it. It's not something new to her. She's seen it and experienced it before, and she was the cause. But at the same time, I'm experiencing this, and I do this. I've chosen to have children. I've chosen to have a life. I've chosen to continue on my life, even though or with this. And that's a choice. Not just the idea of like, hey, it's a choice, live, not live, but it's also a choice, what kind of life am I going to have? Does that not mean that I spend days in my house and don't go out? I spend days in my house and don't go out. I choose very actively where and when I'm going to use my energy, because being in constant pain is a huge energy drain in and of itself. And going back to the idea of D&D for a second, most people, there's this concept called spoonies. I don't know if you've ever heard it. Have you ever heard the idea of spoonies?
No.
Okay, so this is not D&D, and then I'll go to D&D. Someone came up with an idea of spoons as a metaphor for how much energy you have when you're in pain, how much energy you have to deal with your day. And think about it, you go to the drawer and you start with X amount of spoons, 10 spoons in your drawer at the beginning of the day, and you get dressed. That costs you a spoon. You go and do something that costs you 2 spoons. It costs you 3 spoons. I don't like that metaphor for a lot of reasons, because afterwards you have to wash your spoons. Who has energy to do that after you've already wasted all your energy or used all your energy? But in D&D, there's a concept called hit points and exhaustion points. And it goes like this. Hit points is how healthy am I? So when you wake up in the morning after a nice, long, good rest, probably full hit points, okay? After a long rest, I'm lucky to wake up with 90% of my hit points, 85% of my hit points back. Just because the rest wasn't as restful as it needed to be. I wake up in the middle because of a pain.
Yeah.
I moved wrong, and all of a sudden my leg got a little brush on it and I'm up. Then I have to get dressed. Well, that involves taking off my pajamas. That's a hit point. And it involves putting on clothing. Well, that's a hit point. And if I have to use the bathroom, that's a transfer. So that's a couple of hit points along the way. And then I have to transfer back from the toilet after I've used it. So that's another things like for you, it's like you've used like a quarter of a hit point on all of that, and I've used 6, 7 just to start my day. And as we get into hit points, we become exhausted. And the more we live in that realm of not getting back to full hit points, we become more and more tired. And the more tired we are, the less effective we are at doing what it is we need to be doing. In D&D, you start rolling badly on your response rolls, and then you start rolling badly on your active rolls, on the things you want to be doing. It's the same thing in real life. Like when I'm tired because I'm in so much pain, and I'm dealing with that lack of energy that's happening because of these hit points, this loss of hit points, I'm not going to be as effective in my responses. I'm more likely to be angry. I'm more likely to respond badly. I'm more likely to misinterpret the situation.
Do you feel like you have become a lot stronger, though, in terms of managing these hit points? So maybe the certain things you described to start your day maybe would have completely depleted you 15 years ago, but today it doesn't deplete you as much.
100%. I think that it's also a function of I'm very choosy about how I use my hit points and when I'm willing to go into exhaustion points. I have to have purpose behind what I do. For instance, I normally don't because I don't have a 9 to 5, and I don't need to be out the door early in the morning. I normally help with the kids to try and get them out, and I know I'm getting hit points. I'm going to take hit points for that.
I'm sure a lot of hit points.
A whole bunch. But it's like help make them their tensies so that they have their snack for the day, and make sure they get a hug before they walk out the door. Those hit points, totally worth it. I am doing something which is beyond self. It's not about me using them on myself. And after they're gone, I will take a little while before I actually get out of my pajamas and into clothing. Like I'll give myself a half hour, 45 minutes of recuperation time just to get over those few hit points that got taken out on me doing that stuff for family, so that I can then start doing for self. Then I'll start doing for self, and that'll be, okay, here is going to cost me some hit points to do this.
Do you take anything for pain?
I do not take anything at this point in my life.
0 things.
Not a thing.
Have you tried?
I have taken everything out of the face of the planet.
And what things did not help?
So there were things that helped a little bit and put me on cloud 9, and I like a bad kind of cloud 9, like that fuzzy kind of, hey, I'm not responding as quickly. I'm not.
You're not present.
Not present. I'm not really there. I hated that when I was in school. They had me try OxyContin for a little while in school, and I hated it. For instance, it made me feel horrible. Did it help with the pain? A little bit.
It works, huh?
A little bit. But I hated the feeling.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. It made me feel not good.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do that. It wasn't worth it, given the amount of pain relief it was giving. It just wasn't enough. And I think it was like.
But sorry.
I think it was like 3 weeks or a month into it. I was like, I'm done. I can't continue doing this.
But during that month, was it a dilemma? Because if it's, you found something that's helping your pain.
No, it wasn't helping enough to make it worthwhile. It wasn't at all. It was like, if we're putting it in percentage wise, 10, 15% of the pain decrease. Okay. It just wasn't worth it. If I was taking something, it had to really make it worthwhile for me to be in a state of cognitive depression, cognitive.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the word word is.
Yeah.
Not 100% there.
Yeah. But was that the 15% depletion of pain? Was that the most effective medication that you tried? Or was there anything that was more extreme and beneficial? Speaking about the pain alone, forget about being present.
There were other things that I tried that were more effective. Some of them were things that, like, when I took them, it would be okay if I kept up taking them on a regular basis. There'd be like a very short period of some kind of cognitive impact, and then it would just sort of level out and was fine as long as I was taking on a regular basis. But then if I stopped at any point and came back to it, it wasn't as effective as it was before, or it wasn't as worthwhile. Some of the things that I was taking would be very effective, but for a very, very short period of time. Like, it would help for half an hour, and then what? And you couldn't take again for 6 hours.
So it was almost like
it was a tease.
Yeah, teasing you.
It was a tease, and it was a horrible tease because what happened is the rebound effect of the pain was sometimes worse than what the pain had been beforehand, because you have this sense of like, oh, there's less pain, and there's like, oh my God, there's lots of pain. Oh, wow. Oh, burning. And just dealing with it was just so intense, and it wasn't worth it.
Did you go to any, Eastern medicine healers, any other alternative treatments that you would never even think about trying, but you tried?
So I've tried, in terms of different spectrums of alternative medication, if we want to call it that, or yeah, I guess alternatives.
Therapies.
Yeah. I don't like the term alternative in general. I find that to be a little bit offensive to these people who have been doing this for thousands of years. Oriental medicine has been around longer than Western medicine has. It's not so alternative.
I guess alternative to what we're preached as conventional.
Right. Well, it's not Western medicine. Okay, fine. But I find it really interesting. Like, I've tried everything from, acupuncture and acupressure and energy healing and herbal healing and
I'm interested
and lymph node, this, that, and the other thing, and massage therapy. Like, I give me the spectrum. I could probably say yes to it.
I'm interested though on maybe the Chinese medicine's take on what you're suffering from. Do they say, hey, it's CRPS as well?
They don't use that term. I don't think that's, depending on who we're talking about, it'll be like their chakras that are blocked. They'll talk about things like different paths not functioning well or needing to activate certain pathways. Whether it's through acupuncture, there was a lot of attempts to do that, to either deplete certain messages that were being sent on certain pathways or increase certain energy paths.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of it. I mean, needling my legs was very, very difficult, because even the needles, which are these super thin, like not supposed to hurt a lot. They hurt a lot. And to have them stay in, and people are like, oh, once they're in, you don't feel them. I feel them, and it can, like, it's a big deal.
So was there any progress from undergoing these treatments?
No, nothing. The things that...
Temporary relief, maybe?
Not so much. The thing that I did get from it actually was interesting. One of my therapists, she would acupuncture. She would actually bleed my earlobe, the top of my ear, and when she would pop it, it would like gush blood for a good 3-4 minutes. And when she did that, it didn't relieve the pain, but it relieved some of the pressure that I was dealing with in my legs. And it was very interesting when she would do it, because she would come in and say, where are we at today in terms of pressure and in terms of your legs? And I'd be like, it's really bad. And she would start like rubbing the top of my ear, and she could feel like a buildup of blood. And she would take one of her needles and pop it. And like the moment she pulled the needle out, there was just this release, and I could feel it. And I would feel it like body wide. It wasn't just in my ears that I was feeling the release.
Where do you stand now in terms of therapy?
I'm not doing any, I mean, besides hydrotherapy right now and occasional massage therapies, because using a wheelchair is extremely, extremely hard on the upper body. I'm not doing anything in particular to try and heal my body.
What does the massage therapy entail?
Massage therapy is mostly for like lower back pain, shoulder, my
Upper body, though, focus, yeah.
Yeah. At some point, I think it was in 2012, I saw a doctor, and I had been going from doctor to doctor asking if they could take off my legs. Like, I had gotten to the point where I was like, maybe we should just take them off. And none of the doctors were willing to take off my legs. They were like, it's spread from one leg to the other, and it may still be spreading on you. If we cut and hurt the nerves again, we can't guarantee that it's not going to spread more quicker. We're not doing this. And I actually got really frustrated because it was something I was really, really considering at the time. And then one of the doctors who I saw, he looked at me and goes, David, you just have to give up on the legs and accept that this is how it's going to be. And I was like, excuse me? He said, listen, it's really very simple. If you don't give up on the legs and continue to fight, you're probably going to make this worse because you are trying to do something that will cause more damage. It would be better for you to simply say, I'm going to work to maintain my body function. And all of a sudden we did this switch in my therapy, in hydrotherapy specifically, where it wasn't anymore about trying to heal David. It was about how much can we keep David physically active? How much can we keep me and my butt muscles moving and my thigh muscles moving? So I'll get into the water, and in the water, I'll do like bicycle in the water just to move my legs.
And what does David now think about that statement from the doctor then?
I think that cognitively, it was a very important thing to do because it made it possible for me to live much more of my life without feeling like I was constantly fighting my legs. I'm still dealing with my legs all the time, but I'm not fighting them. With that, at some point about 6 years ago, I came to the very real realization that I do want to push myself a little bit. And I do want to set specific goals for myself and objectives that involve some form of improvement, some form of fighting, but not see, how do I describe this? I find that a lot of therapy is about the immediate fight, right? The real fight. But if you think about therapy as a long-term thing, where I'm not going to set a goal for now, and in 6 months from now, I have to have hit that goal, but rather I'm going to set a goal for now, and it's 5 years down the line. If 5 years from now, I'm going to try and make this minuscule improvement in my life. But it's going to take a huge amount of willpower to continually work towards that objective and having little teeny tiny goals along the way. And that's something I did. And actually, I'm coming up now, like this week, on the date that I set for hitting one of those objectives. And it's been a 5-year process of...
Do you mind sharing the objective?
Okay, so normally I would say no, but because it's literally like 5 days from now, I can share it. And the reason is because when you share a goal, just as a side note, don't ever share your goals with people or your objectives, because you get it when you share your goals, you get a dopamine hit, and it means like it makes you less likely to put in the time and energy to actually like go for your goal because you think you've already hit it. Your brain starts to feel like it's already hit it. So in general, the answer would be no.
Because people will compliment you just for sharing the goal, not necessarily accomplishing.
Not even that. Your own body gets the feeling of like what you're literally doing is telling your body, like, because you've vocalized it and you've put it out into the world, you are literally creating for your body the sense of, oh, I've moved forward on this. I've accomplished something. But you haven't. Like, you haven't actually accomplished it. And it's a very dangerous thing to do. So don't ever share your goals.
So sorry for making you do this.
It's good. No, it's good. So about 5.5, 6 years ago, I was in synagogue, and a friend of mine their kid had a bar mitzvah. And the father got up and he says this line, and I had never really paid attention because my first son was born in 2010. I'd never really paid attention to what happened at a bar mitzvah in terms of the dynamics. And I asked about it, and someone was like, oh yeah, the father's supposed to get up and say this line to the son. And I was like, What do you mean get up? And he was like, well, according to the Ramah, who's one of the people who writes about it, there's this whole thing. The father stands up and says, this line. And I was like, And I sort of dwelled in that for a little bit, and I started researching it, and I started looking into it, and it was like something that I really wanted to learn about. There's not a lot of literature on it, but there's enough for me to say, hey, I need to talk to a rabbi. I went and spoke to the rabbi. And I was like, look, technically, you're supposed to stand up. If you can stand up, you should. And I was like, okay, here's a goal. I presently am not physically capable of putting both feet on the ground and pushing my body upright and standing up for more than 4 seconds, 5 seconds, max. I am going to push myself from here. I have 5 years. I'm going to get to the point where I can say this full line standing without crutches at my son's bar mitzvah. And I was like, this is something I am going to do. And I went into to my hydrotherapist, to the head of the hydrotherapy, who is she no longer works there, but she is a godsend. And I said, listen, I'm going to share this with you. I'm not sharing this with anyone else. This is what I want to do. And she said, okay, let's build a program from now until then. And it involved getting me crutches that I could use in the water to start working on weight bearing in the water. It involved a lot of stretching exercises in the water. It involved a lot of just relaxation in the water and finding a zone of comfort where I could just sort of move your toes, move your ankles, move your legs, stretch. And it was a very slow process. At the very beginning, I couldn't stand up on my legs with the crutches almost at all. Like, it was a fight. And it was a fight in the water. We're talking about, I'm not bearing all my weight. You lose, 80% of your body weight or 60% of your body weight in the water. And I did this. I was doing it at the beginning. I was doing it 3 days a week. Then went down to twice a week. And for the last, then Corona happened. And then for the last year and a half, it's been once a week that I've been doing it, with a very clear purpose of, I do once a week in water and once a week at home, trying to stand up without crutches. The water work is with crutches. And then at home, I have somebody who watches me, and I try and stand up. And I have purpose here. And I believe that at this point in my life, I will be able to stand up, say this line to my kid, and I'm going to suffer tremendously for it. And I know this, and everybody, like my family knows that afterwards, yes, I'll be at lunch, but the afternoon, we've already talked about the fact that I'm going to need to rest. Everybody knows, we all understood that what's going to happen. There's going to be a huge price tag for this. But I'm going to stand up at my kid's bar mitzvah, and I'm going to say, that line. And I'm going to do it because I set that goal for myself. Now, I hope that by sharing this, I didn't just mess it all up. I don't think I did.
I think that's a great way to end this episode. We've been here almost for a couple hours now. So, look, yeah, it was, it's so intense and so disheartening in many ways to think about, how everything started. But now it's super inspirational, really just listening to you. And I think a lot of people out there have choices to make. It might not be CRPS, it might be something else, but everyone has choices to make, and you obviously made yours. So congratulations for 5 days from now.
Thank you.
I hope everything goes well. And thank you very much for being here on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
If you found this video useful and want to see more like this, make sure you subscribe below and don't forget to hit the notification bell.